I still remember the exact moment my stomach dropped, even before I fully understood why. It was my wedding reception, the happiest day of my life. The room glowing with fairy lights and laughter, my new husband smiling at me like I was the only person in the world. I had just lifted my champagne glass to my lips when I noticed my mother-in-law watching me from across the room, her eyes fixed on the glass in my hand, her smile a little too tight, a little too satisfied. That was when a terrifying thought crossed my mind: what if she had done something to my drink? And the question that has haunted me ever since is this: was I wrong for what I did next, or would you have done the same thing in my place? Before I explain how that moment unfolded, I need to take you back, because nothing about that day came out of nowhere. The truth is, my relationship with my mother-in-law had been tense from the very beginning, long before wedding dresses, guest lists, and champagne flutes ever entered the picture. When I first met my husband, Daniel, I was convinced I had found my person. He was kind, thoughtful, and had this quiet strength about him that made me feel safe. We met at work, started as friends, and slowly became something more. When he introduced me to his family a year later, I was nervous but hopeful. I had always imagined having a warm relationship with my future in-laws, especially my mother-in-law. I thought we would bake together, gossip over tea, maybe even become friends. I couldn't have been more wrong. From the very first dinner, I could tell something was off. Daniel's mother, Margaret, greeted me with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. She complimented my dress, but it felt rehearsed, like something she felt obligated to say, rather than something she meant. Throughout the evening, she asked me questions that sounded innocent on the surface but felt sharp underneath. Where was I from exactly? What did my parents do? How long did I plan on working once I was married? Every answer I gave seemed to be mentally weighed and found lacking. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to. He was just happy everyone was together, laughing and sharing stories. I told myself I was being sensitive, that first meetings were awkward, and that things would improve with time. They didn't. As Daniel and I grew closer, Margaret grew colder. She would make comments about how young people rush into things these days, or how marriage is hard work, especially for women who aren't prepared. Whenever Daniel wasn't around, her tone shifted completely. She would look at me with open disapproval and say things like, "You know, Daniel has always been very close to me," or, "I just hope you won't change him." I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was just protective of her son, that maybe she was scared of losing him. I even went out of my way to be kind to her, bringing her small gifts, asking her advice, inviting her to lunch. Nothing worked. When Daniel proposed, I was over the moon. It was simple and perfect, just the two of us, and I said yes without hesitation. When we told his family, his father hugged us both and congratulated us warmly. Margaret smiled and said she was happy for us, but later that night, she cornered me in the kitchen. I still remember the smell of coffee and the hum of the refrigerator as she leaned in close and said, in a low voice, "Marriage is a big step. I hope you understand what you're taking on." It felt less like a blessing and more like a warning. Wedding planning only made things worse. Margaret had opinions about everything. The venue was too modern. The guest list was too small. The flowers were wrong. She insisted on inviting distant relatives Daniel barely knew and criticized my choices whenever she got the chance. When I tried to set boundaries, she accused me of pushing her out and stealing her son. Daniel tried to mediate, but he was stuck between the woman who raised him and the woman he loved. I could see how much it hurt him, and that made me feel guilty. Even though I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong, there were moments when I seriously considered eloping, just to avoid the stress and the constant tension. But Daniel wanted his family there, and despite everything, I wanted our wedding day to be about love, not conflict. So I swallowed my pride, smiled through clenched teeth, and kept telling myself that once the wedding was over, things would settle down. I had no idea how naive that hope was. The morning of the wedding, I woke up feeling surprisingly calm. As I got ready with my bridesmaids, laughing and sipping mimosas, I felt a sense of peace. This was my day. Nothing could ruin it. When I walked down the aisle and saw Daniel waiting for me, tears in his eyes, every doubt melted away. The ceremony was beautiful. We exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other no matter what, and when we kissed, the room erupted in applause. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The reception was held in a softly lit hall, decorated with white flowers and golden accents. Music played, guests mingled, and the atmosphere was joyful. I danced with my father, laughed with my friends, and tried my best to avoid Margaret, who hovered near Daniel, watching everything like a hawk. I told myself to focus on the good, to enjoy every second. After all, this was a once-in-a-lifetime day. At some point, a server came by with a tray of champagne glasses. Daniel and I each took one for the toast. I remember feeling excited, ready to celebrate, when Margaret suddenly appeared at my side. She placed her hand on my arm and said, "Let me get you a fresh glass, dear. That one looks like it's been sitting too long." Before I could respond, she took my glass and handed me another one from the tray. It all happened so fast that I didn't think much of it at the time. I thanked her, assuming she was just trying to be helpful. But as the speeches went on, I noticed something strange. Margaret kept watching me. Not Daniel, not the guests. Me. Her eyes flicked to my glass again and again, and every time I lifted it slightly, her lips curled into a faint smile. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly remembered all the little moments over the years, all the passive-aggressive comments, the thinly veiled hostility. A thought I didn't want to entertain began to take shape in my mind. What if she hadn't just been helpful? What if she had switched the glasses for a reason? My heart started pounding. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. It was my wedding day. For God's sake. Who would do something like that? But the unease wouldn't go away. I glanced at Daniel, who was laughing with one of his groomsmen, completely unaware. I looked back at Margaret, and when our eyes met, she didn't look away. She just smiled. I felt trapped. If I drank the champagne and something was wrong, it could ruin the day or worse. If I made a scene, I would look crazy, dramatic, ungrateful. I didn't have proof, just a gut feeling and years of tension behind it. I held the glass in my hand, the bubbles rising slowly, and tried to steady my breathing. That was when an idea crossed my mind, one that made my pulse race even faster. I took a small step closer to Daniel and leaned in, pretending to adjust his tie. Quietly, so no one else could hear, I whispered, "I think your mom did something to my drink." He froze, his smile fading slightly. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if I was joking. "What?" he murmured. I shook my head. "I don't know for sure," I said, my voice barely audible, "but something feels wrong." Daniel glanced at Margaret, then back at me. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew how bad things had been between us. "What do you want to do?" he asked softly. I hesitated. I didn't want to put him in an impossible position, especially on our wedding day. But I also didn't want to ignore my instincts. That was when I decided I wouldn't drink from that glass. Instead, I would quietly switch it. If nothing happened, fine, I'd chalk it up to nerves. But if my fear was justified, then at least I wouldn't be the one paying the price. When the music swelled and everyone raised their glasses for the toast, I leaned slightly toward Daniel and switched our glasses in one smooth motion, hoping no one noticed. Margaret noticed. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, the way her expression changed in an instant. Her smile vanished, replaced by something sharp and angry. My hands trembled as I lifted the glass that had originally been meant for me. Daniel raised his glass too, completely unaware of the silent war unfolding just a few feet away. As the toast ended, Daniel took a sip. I watched him closely, my heart in my throat. He swallowed, then smiled, unaffected. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by confusion. Maybe I really was overthinking it. Maybe there was nothing wrong with the drink after all. I took a cautious sip myself, bracing for something terrible to happen. Nothing did. The champagne tasted normal, crisp and cold. For a brief moment, I felt foolish. I had let my imagination run wild on the most important day of my life. I tried to relax, to enjoy the rest of the evening. But Margaret's reaction wouldn't leave my mind. She avoided looking at Daniel now, her attention fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She approached me later, her voice tight as she asked, "Did you enjoy the champagne?" I nodded and said yes, forcing a smile. She studied my face like she was searching for something, then turned and walked away without another word. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Guests danced, laughter filled the room, and from the outside, everything looked perfect. Inside, though, I felt unsettled. I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing or if I had narrowly avoided something much worse. Daniel asked me a few times if I was okay, and I told him I was just tired. I didn't want to ruin the night with accusations I couldn't prove. When we finally left the reception, hand in hand, I thought the worst was behind us. I was wrong, because that champagne incident, as small and surreal as it seemed at the time, was only the beginning of something far more disturbing. And this is where I want you to pause for a moment and really think about it. If you were in my position, on your wedding day, with a gut feeling that someone you couldn't trust had messed with your drink, what would you have done? Would you have ignored it to keep the peace, or would you have trusted your instincts like I did? Because what happened after the wedding made me realize that my fear that night wasn't paranoia at all, it was a warning. And in the next part, I'll tell you exactly how that warning turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. When I say that night was only the beginning, I mean it in a way that still makes my hands shake as I think about it. After the wedding reception ended and Daniel and I finally got into the car, everyone waving goodbye, sparklers fading behind us, I tried to convince myself that the champagne incident was just wedding day anxiety. I told myself I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and reading too much into Margaret's behavior because of years of tension. Daniel squeezed my hand and said, "We're married now. Whatever happens, we face it together." I smiled and nodded, wanting desperately to believe that those words alone could shield us from everything that was coming. The first few days after the wedding felt like a bubble. We went on a short honeymoon, nothing extravagant, just a quiet beach where we could rest, talk, and be alone for the first time as husband and wife. For a while, I forgot about Margaret completely. Daniel was attentive and loving, constantly asking if I was happy, if I needed anything, if I was okay. There were moments when I almost told him that I still couldn't shake the feeling about his mother. But every time I opened my mouth, I stopped myself. I didn't want to poison our first days of marriage with suspicion and fear. But even on that beach, little cracks began to show. Daniel would get notifications on his phone and sigh softly before putting it face down. When I asked who it was, he hesitated and said, "My mom. She's just checking in." Checking in turned into long messages, missed calls, and increasingly tense conversations that he tried to have out of earshot. I could tell he was stressed, and I hated that our marriage seemed to be pulling him into a tug of war between me and his mother. When we returned home, reality hit hard. Margaret wanted to see us immediately. She insisted on hosting a small family dinner to celebrate the marriage properly. Every instinct in my body told me to say no, to create some distance, but Daniel looked so hopeful when he asked me if we could go. "She just wants to move forward," he said. "I think she's trying." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The dinner started politely enough. Margaret hugged Daniel tightly and gave me a brief, stiff embrace. She complimented the wedding, said it was beautiful, said she was proud of her son. For a moment, I wondered if I had misjudged her all along. Then, as the evening went on and the wine flowed, her true feelings began to surface. She made comments about how young Daniel looked, how marriage changes people, how some women don't realize the responsibility they're taking on when they marry into a family. Each comment was followed by a smile, as if daring me to challenge her. At one point, she brought out dessert and insisted on serving me personally. She placed the plate in front of me with exaggerated care and said, I made this myself. I hope you trust me." The words sent a jolt of fear through me. I looked up at her, trying to read her expression, but she was calm, almost smug. My appetite vanished instantly. I thanked her and took a small bite, my heart racing, feeling ridiculous for being so suspicious yet unable to stop myself. Later that night, as we were driving home, I finally told Daniel that something wasn't right. I told him about the champagne again, about the way Margaret watched me, about the comment she made during dessert. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. He said his mother had always struggled with control, especially when it came to him. She had never approved of any woman he dated, but she had been particularly harsh about me. Hearing that didn't make me feel better. It made everything click into place in a way that terrified me. Things escalated quickly after that. Margaret started showing up unannounced at our apartment. She would bring food, claiming she was worried we weren't eating properly. She rearranged our kitchen once while I was at work, saying it made more sense. Her way. She criticized my cooking, my cleaning, even the way I spoke to Daniel, all under the guise of concern. Whenever I tried to push back, she accused me of being disrespectful and ungrateful. And every time Daniel tried to set boundaries, she would cry, telling him he was abandoning her for me. The breaking point came about 2 months into our marriage. I started feeling unwell, headaches, nausea, dizziness that came and went without explanation. At first, I thought it was stress. Then I thought maybe I was pregnant, but tests came back negative. One afternoon, after Margaret had visited and left behind a container of soup she insisted I eat, I felt so sick I could barely stand. Daniel rushed me to the doctor, who ran some basic tests. Everything looked normal. Probably anxiety, the doctor said. Nude stress. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. A memory kept replaying in my mind, Margaret saying, "I hope you trust me." I didn't want to believe what I was starting to suspect. The idea that someone would intentionally harm me, especially my husband's mother, felt too dark, too unreal. Still, I started paying closer attention. I noticed that I felt worse after eating food Margaret brought over. I noticed that she was always very interested in what I consumed, asking if I had finished my plate, if I liked the taste, if I felt okay afterward. One evening, when Daniel wasn't home, Margaret stopped by again with a drink she claimed was a special herbal tonic to help with stress. She handed it to me and watched closely as I held the glass. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I told her I'd drink it later. Her smile faltered for just a second. "It's best fresh," she said. "Go on." That was the moment I knew. I excused myself to the bathroom, poured the drink down the sink, and returned with the empty glass. I told her it tasted fine. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing, and then she laughed, a sharp, humorless sound, and said, "Good. I'm glad it helps." That night, I told Daniel everything. I told him about the soup, the tonic, the way she watched me eat and drink, the way my body reacted afterward. He was pale, shaking his head, struggling to process it all. "She wouldn't," he kept saying. "She's my mother." I didn't push him to believe me right away. I just asked him to watch, to notice, to be careful. The opportunity came sooner than either of us expected. Margaret invited us over for dinner again, insisting on cooking a family recipe. Before we left, Daniel suggested a plan. We would switch plates, just like we had switched glasses at the wedding, without making it obvious. If nothing happened, we'd drop it. If something did, then we'd have our answer. Sitting at that dinner table felt like sitting on a ticking bomb. Margaret served the food with pride, placing a plate in front of me and another in front of Daniel. As she turned away, Daniel casually reached over and swapped our plates. My heart was in my throat. Margaret noticed immediately. Her face went white, then red. "Oh no," she said quickly. "Those plates are different. Yours has less spice." She reached to switch them back, but Daniel stopped her hand. "It's fine, Mom," he said calmly. "We'll just share." She didn't eat much that night. She watched us instead. Halfway through the meal, Daniel started to feel sick. He excused himself to the bathroom, pale and sweating. That was the moment everything shattered. Margaret looked at me, panic flashing across her face before she masked it with anger. "What did you do?" she demanded. I stood up, my voice shaking but firm, and said, "No." "What did you do?" Daniel came back into the room, furious and frightened. He told his mother how sick he felt, how wrong this all was. She tried to deny it at first, then tried to blame me, accusing me of manipulating him, of turning him against her. When that didn't work, she broke down crying, saying she was just trying to protect him, that I wasn't good enough, that she was afraid of losing her son. Hearing her admit, even indirectly, that she had tampered with food was like being punched in the chest. We left immediately. That night, Daniel held me and cried, apologizing over and over for not seeing it sooner, for putting me in danger. The next day, he confronted his father and explained everything. His father was horrified. He admitted that Margaret had always been unstable, but he never thought she would go that far. They insisted she seek help, and for a while there was silence. We went no contact. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My health improved almost immediately. The headache stopped. The nausea disappeared. Life slowly began to feel normal again. Daniel and I went to therapy, both individually and together, to process what had happened. It took time, but we grew stronger, closer, more united than ever. Months later, we heard through family that Margaret had finally admitted to adding things to my food to make me less confident and more dependent. Convinced it would drive a wedge between me and Daniel, she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. Hearing that chilled me to my core. This wasn't just jealousy or dislike. It was obsession. Now, looking back on that wedding day, on the moment I switched those champagne glasses, I realize how close I came to something much worse. Trusting my instincts may have saved me, and that's why I want to ask you again, now that you know the full story. Was I wrong to be suspicious? Was I wrong to switch the glasses, to test the plates, to protect myself even when it meant doubting family? Or would you have done the same thing in my place? If you were on my side, if you believe trusting your gut is sometimes the only way to survive, like this video. Subscribe for more stories like this, because unfortunately, I'm not the only one who's lived through something like this. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I rate every single one. I'll see you all in the next story.